Stop looking at the Aegean as just a corridor on a map. Start looking at it as a switchboard. Because in Trump's world, the countries that matter are not the ones with the most speeches, but the ones that can flip switches on and off. Ports, bases, energy routes, weapons pipelines, sanctions, access. And right now, that switchboard runs straight through Greece and Turkey. For decades, Washington tried to balance them with careful diplomacy. But Trump doesn't balance. He bids. He treats alliances like leverage and leverage like currency. That's why this move is so unsettlingly elegant. In Athens, he locks in an anchor, Kimberly Guilfoyle, as U.S. ambassador. In Ankara, he empowers a channel, Tom Barrack, and gives him influence beyond Turkey, across a wider regional file where real bargains get made. One appointment feels like protection, the other feels like a warning. This is Trump's Greek Gambit. One ally, one back channel, and one region where a private deal can rewrite a public promise. To understand why Athens welcomed Guilfoyle like a strategic event, not just a diplomatic posting, you have to understand one word that has more value than any treaty: access. In traditional diplomacy, you climb ladders, you brief, you wait, you coordinate. In Trump diplomacy, you call. And if the call's answered, the policy follows. Guilfoyle was never designed to be a quiet administrator of routine. She is political by nature, direct, media-trained, loyal to the ecosystem that made her powerful. That is exactly why her confirmation mattered, not because Greece suddenly gained a friend. Greece gained a switch into the decision-making style of a man who distrusts slow institutions. But access alone is not the story. Access is only valuable if the map underneath it has changed. And the map has changed. Greece is no longer treated by Washington as a pleasant ally on the edge of Europe. It is increasingly treated as operational geography, a place where the West can move, stage, resupply, and project power without relying on Turkey's mood swings. That is why the same locations keep reappearing in every serious strategic conversation. Alexandroupolis, because it is not just a port, it is a way to bypass vulnerabilities and move assets north without asking permission from choke points. Suda Bay, because the Mediterranean is not controlled by slogans, it is controlled by who can sustain presence when everyone else is improvising. And the broader network of Greek facilities that turn the country into something Washington values deeply: predictability. Now look at the hardware layer. Greece is not only buying deterrence, it is buying time. The kind of time you need to change the balance gradually without triggering a crisis. The modernization of the Air Force, the upgrades, the procurement pipelines, the runway planning. This is not just military. It is a national strategy to ensure that in the next decade, Athens is never negotiating from weakness. Even the timeline matters. The first deliveries of Greece's F-35s are expected toward the end of 2028, which tells you something important. Greece is building a long game, not a headline, a patient edge. So Guilfoyle's anchor role becomes clear. She is not there to invent a new alliance. She is there to lock the trajectory, to take what is already moving, U.S.-Greece defense cooperation, logistics, modernization, interoperability, and make it harder for the next crisis or the next trade deal to reverse it. And this is why she feels like the ally in Greek eyes, not because she is neutral, but because she is aligned with the simplest truth in this region. If America wants stability in the Eastern Mediterranean, it needs a partner that behaves like a state, not like a bargaining table. But here's the problem. Anchors are not placed only for safety. Anchors are also placed to create leverage. And Trump never places leverage without opening a second door. That door is Ankara. If Guilfoyle represents the anchor, Tom Barrack represents something far more psychologically dangerous for Greece: the possibility that the anchor is only there to be traded later. Because Barrack is not a classic diplomat profile. He comes from the deal world, where relationships are assets, ambiguity is useful, and outcomes are shaped by what can be exchanged. And he was not simply installed as ambassador to Turkey. He was confirmed, empowered, and then pulled into a wider regional role connected to Syria, a file where sanctions, reconstruction, regional influence, and security guarantees collide. That matters because the Syrian file does not live in isolation. It touches Turkey's bargaining power with Washington. It touches refugee pressure. It touches energy routes. It touches regional alignment. And in Trump logic, when one file becomes negotiable, everything becomes negotiable. And then Barrack used a phrase that instantly irritated Athens. He described Greece and Turkey as two bricks and suggested the US could be the mortar that connects them. It sounds peaceful until you hear what it implies: symmetry. Because bricks are equal, the Aegean isn't. When one side keeps a standing threat on the table and pressure becomes routine, two bricks stop sounding like diplomacy and start sounding like a deal in construction terms. Now, to be fair, Washington does not want Turkey to leave the West. Turkey is too large, too geographically central, too militarily significant, and too entangled in regional crises. There are people in the American system who will always argue the same thing. Keep Turkey close. Don't push it into Russia's or China's arms. Manage it. But what does manage it actually mean in practice? It often means finding a deal that keeps Ankara cooperating just enough, even if Ankara keeps pushing at the edges of Greek sovereignty. That is the core of the Greek anxiety, because Greece is not afraid that Washington will suddenly love Turkey. Greece is afraid of something colder, that Washington might decide that Greek security is the price of keeping Turkey useful. This is where the Trump-Erdogan dynamic becomes central. It is not a stable friendship. It is an unpredictable chemistry that can warm suddenly, especially when Trump believes he can extract a personal win. And Barrack is built for that environment. He can talk to Ankara in a language that is not purely diplomatic. It is transactional, market-aware, power-aware, a language where concessions can be packaged as pragmatism and red lines can be softened into flexibility. So the question Greece cannot avoid is brutally simple. If a grand bargain emerges on Syria, on sanctions, on defense cooperation, will the Aegean be treated as a separate sacred space or as a convenient side payment? Because the Aegean is full of issues that can be reframed as technical until they are suddenly strategic. Maritime zones, airspace incidents, Cyprus, drilling rights, military posturing, and Turkey's standing threat, the casus belli logic, which turns legal disputes into deterrence dilemmas. That is why for every cheer in Athens about an anchor, there is a shadow in the room about the channel. The anchor builds Greece's position, but the channel preserves the option to cash it in. And if that sounds abstract, it stops being abstract the moment you look at the environment they're operating inside, a sea where one miscalculation can trigger a cascade. As the Aegean turns into a bargaining table, I'm doing something simple on the money side. I'm positioning my portfolio to match the direction of the region, because geopolitics doesn't just move borders, it moves markets. That's why today's video is sponsored by Freedom 24. I use it because the platform is straightforward, the fee schedule is transparent, and I can get support in my own language when I need it. And here's the idea. Uninvested cash quietly loses purchasing power to inflation. So instead of trying to guess single stocks, I prefer ETFs. Think of them like a switchboard for your portfolio. One move gives you exposure to a whole basket of companies at once. Right now, the ETF I'm watching closely is the Alpha ETF, AETF, which tracks the Greek Large Cap Index, and it's up about approximately 47% over the last 12 months. Of course, investing involves risk. Past performance isn't a guarantee, and your capital is at risk. Why does that fit this story? Because when a country becomes an anchor, capital starts treating it differently. And if Greece is becoming more strategically central, I want exposure to the market that reflects that reality, but with diversification. Sign up takes about 15 minutes worth it in my view. Check the link in the description, and if you join through it, you directly support Money Trail and help us keep producing independent geopolitical analysis. The Aegean is not dangerous because people argue about maps. It is dangerous because the disputes are designed to produce contact, jets, ships, radar locks, naval drills, announcements, counter-announcements, and the constant possibility of an accident that politicians cannot easily walk back. At the heart of it is sovereignty, the oldest and most explosive currency in geopolitics. Where does one state's control end and the others begin? Start with territorial waters. Greece has the legal right under international law to extend its territorial waters to 12 nautical miles, a standard that many countries already apply. Turkey, however, has officially declared that such an extension would be a casus belli, and that's the core problem. A legal right is treated as a trigger for war. So Greece faces a brutal dilemma. It can exercise what the law allows, but doing so could instantly raise the risk of a crisis. That's not balance, that's pressure. And in the Aegean, pressure is never just political, it's operational. Then comes the continental shelf and EEZ logic. This is the energy layer, not necessarily because gas will solve Greece's problems overnight, but because energy is leverage even before it is produced. The moment you define zones, you create stakes, exploration licenses, corporate interests, political guarantees, and the possibility that international actors become invested in your map. Turkey's doctrine challenges the idea that islands generate full maritime zones in the way Greece insists. Greece argues geography and international law support its position. Turkey argues the opposite with maximal claims. The result is not just disagreement, it is repeated confrontation at sea. Then Cyprus. Cyprus is the region's unfinished sentence, a divided island where only Turkey recognizes the northern entity as a state, while Greece, the EU, and the wider international community reject that framing. Every Eastern Mediterranean dispute eventually touches Cyprus, because Cyprus is where the region's legal order is tested. Sovereignty, recognition, maritime zones, and the question of whether force creates new facts. And finally, the military friction. Airspace incidents are not theater. They are signals. They test reaction time, political nerve, and alliance cohesion. They also create a dangerous rhythm. The more normal the pressure becomes, the easier it is for one event to be misread as intentional escalation. Now, zoom out. This is not only a Greek-Turkish problem, it is a NATO problem. Because two allies locked in chronic tension create strategic vulnerabilities that outside powers can exploit, and that internal actors can trade. Which brings us back to Trump's dual-track architecture. Because when you place an anchor in Athens and a channel in Ankara, you are not solving the Aegean problem. You are positioning yourself to control its outcomes. In a calm region, that might be smart, but in a trigger region, the same structure can do something else. It can create incentives for brinkmanship. If Ankara believes there is always a private exit ramp through the channel, it may take bigger risks publicly. If Athens believes its security is tied to an anchor, it may assume Washington will step in, until one day Washington chooses bargaining over guarantees. So the environment itself becomes part of the gamble. And now we can finally name the strategy clearly. Not as a rumor, not as a theory, but as a mechanism. By the way, only 13.4% of you watching have subscribed. If you appreciate deep dive geopolitical analyses, hit like and subscribe. It helps us make more videos like this. Trump's foreign policy is often misunderstood because people look for ideology. But Trump is not an ideology-first operator. He is leverage-first. So the smarter way to read his Greek Gambit is not who does he like, it's who gives him options. And this is where the two-track design becomes almost elegant. Track 1. The Anchor, Greece. This track is public, institutional enough to look normal, strong enough to satisfy the Pentagon mindset. Its purpose is to make Greece the stable platform of American power in the Eastern Mediterranean, a predictable democracy inside NATO and the EU, with expanding operational usefulness, ports, bases, access, modernization. In this track, Greece becomes the place that does not surprise Washington, and that no surprise quality is priceless, because it means Washington can plan rotations, procurement pipelines, logistics, contingencies. It means that in a crisis, from the Black Sea to the Levant, Greece is the reliable node. Guilfoyle in this track functions as the political lock. She is there to keep the relationship warm, visible, and aligned with the president's instincts. So the alliance is not just bureaucratic, it is personal enough to survive turbulence. Track 2. The Channel, Turkey. This track is private, transactional, designed for bargaining. Its purpose is to keep Turkey in play without granting it full trust, to preserve the option for a grand bargain, because Turkey's geography is too valuable to abandon, and Turkey's leadership responds to personal negotiation more than formal pressure. Barrack, in this track, functions as a conduit, someone who can speak to Ankara in the language of deals and deliverables, and who can connect Turkey's needs to Trump's appetite for a visible win. Now, here is the core twist, the part that makes this a gambit rather than a policy. These two tracks contradict each other on purpose. The Anchor tells Greece, you are the platform. The Channel tells Turkey, nothing is final. One track builds leverage by strengthening Greece. The other track preserves the ability to trade that leverage. From Washington's perspective, this creates maximum flexibility. From Greece's perspective, it creates maximum uncertainty, because Greece does not fear being abandoned in a dramatic way. Greece fears something subtler, being used as the stable asset that makes a larger deal possible, and then discovering that stability comes with a hidden clause. So what determines whether this gambit is brilliance or danger? One factor: the next crisis. Because the moment tension spikes, a maritime incident, a Cyprus escalation, a Syria-linked shockwave, a NATO fracture, Trump will not ask, what is the traditional doctrine? He will ask, what is the best trade? And that is the moment the anchor is tested. So in the end, Trump's Greek gambit is not a mystery. It is a design, an anchor in Athens to lock in the map of American power through Greece, a channel in Ankara to keep Turkey negotiable and keep every outcome tradable. For Greece, this is the paradox of becoming strategically valuable, because value brings protection, but it also brings price tags. The comforting reading is that the anchor is permanent, and the channel is only a safety valve. The dangerous reading is that the anchor is there to build leverage, and the channel's there to spend it. And now, the real question becomes unavoidable. When the next crisis hits the Aegean, will Trump treat Greece as an ally or as the most valuable bargaining chip on the table? Write your view in the comments. Is this dual-track strategy genius control, or a recipe for a miscalculation no one can contain? Special thanks to Freedom24 for making this analysis possible. If you're serious about building a great financial future, be sure to check them out in the description below. And if you like this video, I suggest you watch the videos appearing on your screen right now. They continue the story from here and show what this gambit could trigger next in the Aegean. Subscribe to Money Trail, because this game isn't ending, it's accelerating.